It's incredible the difference in size in antler and body as you get up north into Alaska.
Everybody's heard of like a 30-inch mule deer. Well, moose is kind of the same way. It's on width. And when guys talk Alaska, 60-inch is kind of that holy grail.
There's a great book called Float Hunting Alaska's Rivers by a guy named Michael Strahan. He is not the linebacker, FYI.
We had some snow. I had my wife helping me. We shot a moose. I knew we had 4 or 5 days to get it out because of the weather. I would not have done that in September.
This is Jerrod Lile here from the Huntin' Fool on the Wild Initiative podcast.
Put down your latte and pull on your boots.
Our culture needs people that are leaders and not people that are waiting for somebody else to show them how to do it.
Those fields of tofu, that was formerly habitat for wildlife. You're killing off wildlife by being a vegetarian just as much as a hunter when he kills a deer.
I'm like, well, you see that bush right there? There's your bathroom.
Yeah. My dad wears a Levi jacket. He sits in front of a sagebrush, and he tells me the best camo is hold still.
Not to Donnie Vincent this, but be relentless in everything you do. Don't crap out, go back to the truck with excuses or whatever.
Okay, assume I get a deer. How do I cut it up to fit into a Honda Civic?
Just get outside and go, because once you do, it's all gravy from there.
Hey, this is Zach Griffith.
This is Hannah Barron.
This is Jason Phelps of Phelps Game Calls.
Hey guys, this is Cody Rich from the Rich Outdoors podcast.
What's up guys, this is Chad Mendez.
You're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of The Wild Initiative, brought to you as part of the Waypoint Outdoor Collective. All right, y'all, so getting on to today's episode, we are back. Today, we're talking about big ol' moosies. I'm here with Jerrod Lile and Robert Hanneman of Huntin' Fool. Yet again, today we are going to knock out So You Think You Want to Hunt a Moose. Guys, thanks again for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
So, ring, ring, ring. This is Huntin' Fool. Hey, man, I want to hunt a moose. Where do we go from here?
You want to start that one, Robert, or you want me to? I'm
sure,
good.
Nope, I'll take this.
All right.
So just like I take all the other calls. No, I'm just joking. If a guy calls in and he says, hey, I want to hunt moose, my first question is to him is, kind of what moose are you looking to hunt? Because, everyone has different expectations. And, let's just talk about moose in general. We got moose that live down in Utah and Colorado, and they go all the way up through Canada and the Yukon and into Alaska. Boone and Crockett's kind of define those into 3 different subspecies of moose, and they just get bigger as you go further north. So they kind of drew a line in the dirt at the U.S. and Canada border and said anything south of here is a Shiras, anything north of here is a Canadian. And then when you got up to British Columbia along the Yukon line, they did the same thing, and they have the Yukon Alaska moose and the Canadian moose. So essentially, further you go north, the bigger the moose are, and typically the more expensive the hunt can be if you're looking for a guided hunt. So, most guys that want to hunt a moose don't necessarily want all 3 subspecies. They just want the biggest moose they can get. So I would say most guys are planning on going to a state like Alaska. And the cool thing about Alaska, as a U.S. citizen, you can go up there and you can hunt moose without a guide. So, everybody would think that, hey, it's got to be easy. There's moose everywhere. Everybody lives in Alaska, shoots a moose. It's not really the case. It's kind of like, I would say on average, moose success is very typical to what rifle elk success would be in the West. On average, guys are killing a bull probably 20% of the time. So you figure in Alaska, guys are, that are getting after it, that live there, are killing a moose 20% of the time. So, if you want to go guided, you can dramatically increase the odds of killing a bull. If you go on yourself, do it yourself hunt, your odds are going to be whatever you put into it. It's kind of the cool thing. The more you put into it, the better your odds are going to be. So, but then if a guy's like, hey, I want to kill them all, because everybody wants to collect species, and I know me and Jerrod are the same way, that's when we got to start looking at the draw in the lower 48 and then, booking a hunt in Canada and then doing something in the Alaska-Yukon range.
Yeah.
So the 3 species really are just more defined by geography, not necessarily any sort of biological difference for the most part.
No, that's correct. I mean, your moose have just evolved over time, and the bigger moose are live in the more remote, hardy conditions. But I mean, a moose is kind of a moose. Like me and Jerrod joke, I shot a moose in Montana years ago. I shot him about 3 or 4 miles south of the Canadian line. And I'm sure at some point in my moose's life that I killed, he was a Canadian, and now he's, a Shiras. So, I mean, it's just, Boone and Crockett, who's been the holders of the records for pretty much as long as I think anybody's been keeping records, they had to draw a line in the sand. It's kind of like the brown bear and the grizzly bear in Alaska. They had to make a line, or anything, that's this close to the ocean, it's going to be a brown bear, because it's just essentially getting more feed and it's a bigger animal. So, in reality, a moose is a moose. They're all big, they're all giant, they're all tough to pack. But, the further you go north, the bigger they get.
Yeah, both in body size and antler size. It's really interesting. I Robert mentioned this earlier, but I got lucky, drew a tag this year for Shiras moose down here in the lower 48 in Idaho. And the thing that struck me when I was butchering this bull, and he was a good bull. He wasn't a giant Shiras, but a good mature bull. When I was butchering him, it struck me that I felt like he was literally half the size of the Alaska-Yukon moose that I killed. Like, it was just, and he was still way bigger than an elk for all intents and purposes. They're built different, but yeah, it's incredible the difference in size and antler and body as you get up north into Alaska.
Interesting. Okay.
And when we start breaking that down, Alaska moose, there's over-the-counter tags. Anybody can go up there and go hunting. In Canada, if you are, from the U.S., you're going to have to go with an outfitter if you're hunting in Canada. So you're going to have to book a guided hunt. So there's no draw. You just pick the outfitter you want to go with and, schedule your hunt and go. When you get into the lower 48, it gets a little more complicated, because just like we've talked about with sheep and goats and everything else, there's way more people that want to hunt moose than there is tags. So that's where the draw really comes into effect, in the lower 48 for the moose.
Yeah. And, when it comes to, I think we'll cover Canada pretty quick. I think Robert pretty much covered it. You got to book a guide and go, right? Get a spot. And of course, we know Canada's going to reopen eventually over this COVID situation. But and Robert, you're probably going to know this better than I do as far as prices go. But what I do know on average is, if you hunt over on the western side of Canada and BC, et cetera, you're going to pay more for a guided Canadian moose hunt there than you are if you're over in Newfoundland and some of that area. So if you're looking for a quote unquote discounted or cheaper moose hunt, you're going to find cheaper prices as a general rule over on the eastern side of Canada, as opposed to the more wild hunts that you find over on the western side.
I totally agree. So like when I went up and did some work up there in BC a couple of years ago, we were hunting up by the Canadian border. Our moose hunts were going for 18 plus. But we were killing giant moose. Like I said, the further north you go, the bigger the moose get. Those moose, as you get closer to that Yukon line defining, that Boone and Crockett made, you're getting, bigger moose. Now, those moose hunts are expensive, but you're going to kill great Canadian moose. As you go over east, like you said, you get into higher moose populations, and those are kind of more, I wouldn't say meat hunts, but they're reasonable price hunts where a guy can go and have a quality hunt and kill a nice moose. The same thing can be said on the stuff in southern Canada, like along the Montana-Idaho border. Mm-hmm. Those look just like Shiras moose, like we would be hunting here in the lower 48. Because they're not giants like the stuff up in, and again, they could be, great moose, but they're not those 50 to 60 inch giants that you'd kill up in northern BC. Those hunts are a lot more reasonable priced as well. So, with that being said, when we start breaking down, like, everybody's heard of like a 30-inch mule deer, and that's kind of the mark. Like, I want to kill a 30-inch mule deer in my life. Well, moose is kind of the same way. It's on width. And when guys talk Alaska, 60-inch is kind of that holy grail. Everybody wants to kill a 60-inch moose. When you drop down into Canada, that your 50-inch is kind of your holy grail. And when you get down into the lower 48, anything over 40 inches is what we really consider a trophy bull. So, to kind of give your listeners an idea for like horn width, Anything in the lower 48, it's 40 inches wide is typically a trophy bull. When you get into Canada, if you can break 50, that's awesome. Anything in Alaska, 60 is great, 70 is phenomenal. But just to kind of give you an idea, not only in body size, like Jerrod said, but in horn size and width. Further north you go, better bulls you're going to have.
Yep. So back down to the lower 48 in the draw system there, I think, Robert and I both joked at the intro or before the intro here that the reality is the lower 48 conversation can get over pretty quick. Honestly, the best draw odds by a landslide for trying to draw a Shiras moose tag is going to be in Idaho, and it's expensive. They're going to, Idaho charges you up front for the tag fee, whether you draw it or not, and then they refund you if you do not draw. They also charge a big convenience fee for processing your credit card, and they also hit you for almost $300 now in non-refundable hunting license fees. So it's expensive to apply, but the draw odds are exponentially better than anywhere else in the lower 48, particularly for a lot of the hunts that are further north up in the panhandle of Idaho. But there's some other areas of Idaho too that are kind of sleepers that have decent draw odds.
I would say all in all, on average, you take out, a couple of the top units like 54 and things like that are 1% odds. If you average in everything, you're probably looking at realistically 8 to 10% draw odds, average across the state for Idaho. And there's no point system. So a guy starting today, it has the exact same opportunity as someone, that's been applying for 20 years. So Idaho is like the only state we really, really recommend guys at the Huntin' Fold to apply for moose, especially if they really want to, put a check mark in that Shiras box. There is 5 other states that do offer Shiras moose tags, Wyoming, Washington, Utah, Montana, and Colorado. All of those would kind of fall into that same as the sheep. I mean, in reality, for those states we just talked about, you're under 1% odds. If you're just starting out today, you have no bonus points, you're under 1% odds. Now, if you're already applying for Utah and you want to throw another $10 at it, that's awesome. But, the rest of those states, you're going to have to be into it, roughly $100. And Colorado is going to take your money for 3 years before they put your name in the hat. So, Wyoming used to be like when people think of Shiras moose, another name for them is Wyoming moose. And Wyoming was kind of the holy grail of killing big Shiras moose. And I'm one of those guys that has almost 2 decades of points in Wyoming. And I plan on hunting that at some point because I'm young enough. I should, live long enough to draw a tag. But when I started applying, 20 years ago, there was 75% more moose in the population in Wyoming than there is today. Unfortunately, in the 90s, the wolves came in and they just wreak havoc on moose. Moose will kind of stand their ground. They get in that deep snow and the wolves they're hard on them. So, unfortunately, Colorado is different. Their moose are thriving. There's no wolves there. But states like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, they've played heck. The wolves have really hurt our populations. I know me and Jerrod both spent a lot of time living in Montana. Jerrod, how many more moose did you see 20 years ago than you do now?
Oh, 10, 20 times. That's not an exaggeration. Yeah, they've definitely been hit the hardest. Again, they just don't cope well with that predation, that style of predation. So, and a lot of it too is moose in Alaska, and not to get off on a tangent here, but, moose in Alaska and larger ranges, they have big riparian areas and stuff that they can get in the water and have escapement. And then the lower 48, we've fenced off all the riparian areas. Those are all privately owned. There's not a river bottom in the lower 48 that's not in wilderness, that isn't privately owned and proudly fenced. And so the moose just don't have the kind of escapement that they used to have in terms of how they manage dealing with that type of a predator. And that's where they would live, right? They'd live down there on that willow browse and that kind of stuff. So it was fairly natural for them to kind of pop into the deep water and wait out the wolves or whatever. But those days are gone. So it's kind of a sad story.
No, so if you want a Shiras moose, and you don't have a big checkbook, because there are states that have governor's tags. Utah has some landowner tags. Just apply in Idaho. And if you apply for moose, you can't apply for sheep or goat or deer, elk, or antelope. Just apply there and, hope to draw your shire's tag and check that box. But the rest of the states, unless you're already applying there or just want to, spend an extra couple $100 for 1% odds, you may be better off spending your money in a raffle.
Yep. No, and when it comes to Idaho in particular, there's a risk tolerance there, right? There's, harvest success on these sort of once in a lifetime species. In Idaho, you can harvest one bull and one antlered and one antlerless moose in your lifetime. And when it comes to those, the harvest success is usually managed to be pretty high, but there are a lot of units in Idaho that consistently do not have good harvest stats. They're closer to 30 to 50, 60%. Those units are going to provide your better draw odds. And if you have the kind of time and energy to put into it, there's still plenty of moose. It's a very conservatively managed species. So, and I'll use my unit this year. I drew a unit down in southern Idaho that's not very well known for trophy quality or for harvest success. It's had pretty poor harvest success over the last few years. I knew the draw odds would be better. I wanted a moose tag, and I have the luxury of being able to spend quite a bit of time hunting. And believe me, I burned up a lot of fuel and tire leather and boot leather living in the woods with the moose. And even though it was a quote unquote poor unit, when you look at it compared to other units in Idaho, statistically, I saw a ton of bulls, between trail camera and glassing and just face-to-face encounters, call-ins, et cetera, well over 20 different bulls during that time frame, and ended up killing a nice bull with my bow, late in the season. That's the other thing. Idaho, has one thing to keep in mind when you're applying in Idaho. Look at the season dates, because when you get up north, a lot of those have shorter seasons. On average, the main moose hunts start like August 30 and go clear through like November 23rd. So, you've got a long time to get it done. Pick a unit that's got better draw odds and lower harvest success and go spend some serious time in it, and you can dig one up.
And that's those long seasons are amazing. I drew my Montana moose tag years ago, and, I'd seen a lot of mooses. I've been out elk hunting, things like that, and thought, this hunt's not going to be too bad, maybe a week or so. 24 days later, I killed a giant. But I was looking for a special bull and I found him, but I started in September and I didn't kill him until late November, and the moose rut is typically, the very end of September, the first part of October. Those bulls are really traveling, they're fun to call. They're very aggressive. They don't like to hang up as much as elk do. So, it's one that you can get close and personal with them. But when you think about it, there's not a lot of moose compared to elk and deer and everything else. And when you go out and you see moose as you're hunting other things, that's cool. But when you try to focus on moose, you're going to be covering a lot of country. And like I said, they're kind of a more elusive animal than I gave them credit for until I actually had a tag.
Same. Yep.
So, I think it really, again, and we talked about this in the last episode, it all comes down to building across the board your hunt plan. Because you mentioned Idaho, and, Idaho has different options where you can apply for sheep or you can apply for moose. You can't be applying for both in the same year. So if you do want to hunt moose, you'll probably have to then change your hunt plan for sheep if that was part of it. And, it's all part of, there's a lot of interwoven complexities if you're kind of like us and you just want to hunt everything everywhere. and that's one of the benefits of a service like Huntin' Fool, where you guys can sit and help people navigate all of that and really figure out those complexities and how that's going to balance in the long term versus the short term. Because and you are forking out a lot of non-refundable license fees and things like that for Idaho. But maybe if over the, tags in Idaho for elk, or your plan for hunting elk every year while you're building points in other states, then again, you're using your money wisely, and you're balancing that out a little bit better. So. Yeah,
no, that's an excellent point. And not, again, I sound like I'm always pimping our services, but like I know that you're offering that TWI 60 free, 60-day trial of Huntin' Fool's digital tools. One of the best ways to figure out your Shiras moose strategy is to jump into our draw odds calculator. And, it will be very clear why we recommend Idaho as your number one source. You can actually sort by draw odds percentage in ascending or descending order. And again, you can pick a unit that's got, 30% draw odds potentially in it, but the harvest success is going to be low in those cases, right? But man, you're talking 1 in 3 draw odds last year in at least one unit.
Oh, another cool thing is we kind of harp on the West and the Shiras moose and the draw odds, or not the draw odds, but the draw odds are all under 1% minus Idaho, and every one of those states is going to, cost you a pretty penny to apply. Years ago when I came to work for Huntin' Fool, they didn't cover Eastern Canadian moose areas. And, that was something that I always applied for. I applied for Maine, I applied for Vermont, and I applied for New Hampshire. And, we started covering those as well. And, these are Canadian moose that live over there. You wouldn't need to hire an outfitter. Like we talked about in Canada, you have to go to Canada, hire an outfitter to go on a moose hunt. These hunts you can do on your own. So if you're looking to try to kill all 3 moose, maybe you don't want to spend the money to go to Canada, or, you'd rather just hunt, moose in the US, those are other states to apply for. The draw odds are still very similar to most other states minus Idaho, probably typically looking, under 1% if you're just starting out, but they're really inexpensive to apply. Maine is $15 to apply, but Maine's a little different. You can buy essentially more chances. 10-pack of chances usually run to you around $50, $55. Vermont is $25. You can apply for the archery hunt and the rifle hunt. So you throw them $50, and New Hampshire is another $25. So those are 3 states that we cover in the Huntin' Fool in depth. And like I said, for under $100, you can add 3 different states for applying for moose, which are typically those moose are going to be bigger than your Shiras moose for the most part. And you can add all those 3 states for almost less than you can add any other state in the West. So it's another thing. We got a lot of guys that love to play the game, put in for states. So we've added these states and, do research on them and help guys apply. The other cool thing is if you do draw one of these tags, the outfitters in the East are very affordable. I mean, most moose hunts are going to run you $3,000 to $6,000, where you really can't touch much in Canada for under $6,000. So, and then, if you got a bunch of listeners living on the East Coast, they should be looking at those states and at least throwing a little money at them. And maybe they don't have to travel all the way to the West to kill moose.
Yeah. Great point.
So say I'll give you 2 scenarios. Say, I'm in my 30s, brand new to this. What am I looking at? If I want to kill all 3 species, what am I looking at kind of price range if I want to reasonably kill one of each in my lifetime? And then what am I looking at maybe price range if I'm just like, hey, I just want to shoot a moose. Like I'd like it to be like a respectable moose, but it doesn't have to be a giant. I don't care what species it is. Doesn't have to be a giant, but I want to do it in without waiting 20 years. With those 2 scenarios, what am I looking at kind of price range?
So we'll start with Alaska. You want to go full tilt guided, you're going to be looking, 14, 15 and up. There's some outfitters killing giants that are, well into the 20s. That's a full guided turnkey. You're going to have a great opportunity to kill a real big bull. If you want to go to Alaska and do it on your own, and maybe you're driving up from the West, you're going to, rent a raft, your fuel, your tags, everything into it. You might be able to pull a hunt off, do it yourself for, maybe $3,000, especially if you can get a flight. Maybe you find a river to float into and you have to fly out, or find a river that floats all the way through, or fly in and float back out to your truck. A guy could do a hunt for $3,000, get a buddy involved, and, you guys can have a pretty good do-it-yourself 2-week experience. And then there's kind of the next step up is guys doing like hunt planners and packages, where they're, kind of, it'd be almost like here in the West, sometimes you get outfitters that aren't hunting a unit this year, and they might sell a hunt planning kit for a certain unit, and you get their trail cameras, their pictures, all that information, and you get to do it for a reduced price than a fully guided hunt. Those guys up there are usually charging, I would say, in the total hunt with airfare, flying in and out, 5 to 8. And those guys are usually having 50% plus success. So, bare bones, you're going to do it yourself, probably looking around $3,000, some kind of hunt planning kit, double that, maybe a little more, fully guided, double that. For going into Canada, what's some of the lower price stuff Isaiah's got available, Jerrod, kind of like north of Montana? Do you know off the top of your head some of those prices?
I don't. I want to say like 65 to 7,500, but I might be too low on that.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe like in the 8,500 range, and then as you go further over into Eastern Canada, there as well, I think you're going to be kind of in that same ballpark. In the lower 48 for Shiras, those can kind of be the most expensive because you're going to have to buy a landowner tag if for somewhere like Utah, and that tag's going to cost you, man, it could be anywhere for 10,000 plus, for a good tag, plus the guiding and outfitting on top of that. I mean, you can get into it for probably the same price as you would one of the top end outfitters, in Alaska. So your Shiras, because again, it's supply and demand. There's not as much Shiras available as there is Canadians and Alaska-Yukon. So as you go south, you're going to kind of get into that trying to draw a tag or have to buy a tag, which is going to be more expensive.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that Robert touched on in Alaska that I think is important to hit on, and I think it's true for all of these, prices are going up. And again, it's not a scare tactic to try to get you to burn all your family vacation fund. But the reality is they are going up. Even like transported hunts, like Robert was talking about, with these kind of like help you out, drop you in some logistics packages, et cetera. I've seen those things go up from, I was seeing them at $3,500 not long ago. And we actually saw one roll out for like 11,500 this year. Jeez. And that's just basically all your support, the things that you need, your camp, they're going to take you to a decent location, et cetera. So, if you're thinking Alaska moose, it's probably a good time to try to do it sooner rather than later. And when it comes to the styles, the DIY versus transporter versus fully guided, it is important to note that transporters can't technically provide you any advice, right? So they can't guide you because they're not permitted to do that. They're just basically a logistics support agency. It doesn't mean that they don't know what's going on, and they do. Believe me, this is how they're making a living, and they're putting you in good spots. But if you're counting on booking a transported hunt and then picking the guy's brain and having him dump you on top of a moose, that's just not going to be the case.
And there's a difference between the transporter, like Jerrod's talking about. That's just your pilot or your guide running you up a river. Then the guy that's, typically selling you like a hunt planning kit, that guy is not going to be your transporter, and they can supply you with that kind of information. Right. But the guy that is taking you up, that is something that he can't do up there for that. One other thing is if you are ever going to hunt, a sheep or, a caribou or anything, and you're going on a guided hunt somewhere, a lot of times these other species can be added on for just a trophy fee, and you might get a screaming deal if you booked a Dall sheep hunt or a caribou hunt and you stumbled upon a big moose or vice versa. If you're up there and you can take a few animals, you can kind of, make that money go a little bit longer than if you booked a moose hunt, then you booked a sheep hunt, then you booked a caribou hunt, then you booked a grizzly hunt. And, if you can shoot multiple things while you're there, I know here at the Huntin' Full, every one of us is like, what all tags can we have? Like, I'll buy them all, because if the opportunity gets there, we'll try to make it happen, because on a trophy fee, things are, way more reasonable because your expense has already been paid for everything else. That's just bonus for the outfitter, except for the packing of the moose or whatever it is, and for yourself.
I mean, I think in general, any travel hunt, any hunt that's got serious logistics to it, beyond just your tag fees, it's one thing you're driving a state or two over. Yeah, there's logistics, but it's not as extreme as with other hunts. But any hunt that has such extreme logistics like that, it only makes sense to fork out a little bit of extra dough. If this is something you want to do, to fork out that little bit of extra dough and try and combine as much as possible. Like you said, if you're going to Alaska, you want to do a caribou hunt, you want to go after a moose, it only makes sense to do your best to book them all together if you have that option.
Yeah, or at least know that you can add them for a trophy fee. Like Robert said, it's nice to clarify that in advance so that you're not there when the pressure's on and deciding whether you want to spend $7,000 to smash that grizzly bear, negotiating on the mountain. You kind of get your poop in a group before you go up, figure out your plan, figure out what your risk tolerance is, your financial tolerance. I think, that covers the U.S. and Canada pretty darn well, I think, overall. One thing I will say about coming back to Alaska, two things, actually. The first one is, and I don't know if you want to link to it in your notes or not, but there's a great book called Float Hunting Alaska's Rivers by a guy named Michael Strahan. He is not the linebacker, FYI, but it is spelled the same. It's Strahan. And it's a huge book. It's like a Bible. And he breaks down tons of rivers that he's done all these trips on. And he is one of those logistics providers that Robert references to, that you can hire him as a consultant. I've had nothing but good, positive feedback around him from personal friends and other associates who have experience with him. So it's a good place to start. The other thing I was going to say, there is a draw for moose in Alaska. And typically speaking, when we think of a draw, we think, okay, that's got to be better trophy potential or whatever else, right? We associate a better hunt with a tag system that requires me to draw it. In Alaska, nothing could be further from the truth on the moose hunts in particular. We typically encourage most of our clients not to apply in the draw because what Alaska's doing, those draw units are typically around the bigger population centers like Wasilla and Anchorage and Fairbanks, et cetera. And what they're doing is they're restricting the number of non-residents who can basically, steal the Alaskans' food. So realistically, the trophy potential is usually smaller because they're areas that you can drive moose buggies. Like there's no off-road restrictions here, et cetera. And so there's actually smaller moose as a general rule, smaller population because they're hunted pretty hard by the locals. And in general, it's just not a great idea to apply through the draw necessarily. Having said that, I've drawn 2 of those tags and went on 2 hunts in 2012 and 13 back to back. I drew some hunts there and went with a buddy of mine who is an Alaska resident. And so I want to speak briefly about the logistics of doing a DIY alaska-yukon hunt. And this is a terrestrial hunt. This is on ATVs or moose buggies or whatever else you want to call it. We went in 52 miles on ATVs the second time. Took in, I think, 40 gallons of fuel with us. I think we fixed 4 flat tires, rebuilt 1 carburetor, got towed across 2 rivers, flipped over 2 4-wheelers that were flipped, lost our trailer I don't know how many times. Like, it is as wild as you can get. It took us 2 days to get 50 miles on ATVs. The point is even those require a tremendous amount of logistic support. They have specialized trailers that they build for these ATVs, but there's a lot of road system. There's almost no road restrictions in like Unit 13 and that stuff in the central part of Alaska. It could be a super wild, fun hunt too. And there's plenty of moose. If you're in there long enough, you're going to have a good opportunity.
Well, is there anything else we need to cover on moose for somebody that wants to get a large chunk of meat? I'm blown away. Like, I've seen people's freezers after they come home with a moose, and like I thought elk was a lot of meat, but damn.
I guess I would say a couple things. Don't shoot a moose in the water. I mean, it's the most horrible thing in the world. If it's standing on the riverbank, put it through the shoulder and keep shooting it, and hopefully it doesn't go in the water. Because if it does, it's not going to be a fun experience. Same thing with a bog. Like if it's standing there, keep shooting, put it down. The other thing is moose are giant. Be aware of how far you are from your camp, where you can get a vehicle to, your airstrip, or the body of water you're on. Because if you're too far away, you're going to spoil that. And Alaska is, they're more aware of, meat wasting policies than anyone else. Like a lot of areas got to leave, you can't debone it. You got to bring the ribs out, so, it's not worth spoiling a moose, hunt in the area that you can get a moose out. And the same thing in the lower 48. When I killed my moose, I was 3.5 miles from a road. It was middle of November. We had some snow. I had my wife helping me. We shot a moose. I knew we had 4 or 5 days to get it out because of the weather. I would not have done that in September.
Yep.
Moose are giant animals, and it is a lot of meat to take care of. And even if you kill a big bull and it's cool and you hang it down, you can still get bone sour on a big rear quarter of a moose. You almost got to split that down the bone to open that up to get it to cool down, even on cool nights. There's just a lot of meat there, and it'll hold heat.
That's crazy. So on average, like, how much meat weight are you carrying out after you've quartered that thing?
Well, my Alaska-Yukon moose with the head and cape and everything, right? And the lower jaw was still in it, but hanging quarters, cape, head was just over 700 pounds. So basically I carried as much out as a mature bull elk weighs running around on the hoof, right? And then I just killed a Shiras moose, so I know the number on this too. I had 320 pounds of meat. This was excluding horns and cape. It was 320 pounds of hanging meat with the bone in the quarters.
Holy hell. I'm just thinking about that on my back in a long, long day. But alrighty, guys. Well, I want to make sure everyone heads on over to thehuntinfool.com. I want them to check out the cost calculator resource. Also, make sure y'all are checking out the draw deadlines. We will link to those on the show notes page. And just as a reminder, use code TWI60, get 60 free days to use and abuse the Huntin' Fool service to get all your draws in there. And honestly, see the value that they offer for planning out your hunt plan for the next, I don't know, if you're like us, 20, 30 years, hopefully more. One of my favorite stories is from Jim Shockey about his father on the way to the hospital telling him to stop so he can pick up his whitetail tag. But on that note, guys, thanks again so much for hopping on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, bud.
All right, y'all, that'll do it for this episode of The Wild Initiative. Make sure to check out the show notes page at thewildinitiative.com. Get links to everything we talked about in today's episode. Y'all, I want to say a big thank you to both Jerrod and Robert for hopping on the podcast and sharing all of this super valuable information with y'all. Hope y'all were taking notes. Make sure, again, I can't harp on this enough. There's no reason for you not to head on over to huntinfool.com, the Huntin' Fool website, sign up for a digital membership using that TWI60 code. Gets you 60 free days, y'all. This will get you through all your application planning, all of that stuff. See what is so valuable about the service. And again, check out those free tools on the website. Make sure you check out that list of draw dates and check out that hunt cost calculator to see what you're going to be paying out of pocket. All right, y'all, that'll do it for this week. Looking forward to next time. But until then, I hope this podcast inspired you to get involved, get outdoors, and plan your initiative for the wild.
Thank you for listening to The Wild Initiative. Please take a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, and head on over to thewildinitiative.com to get show notes, check out the blog, gear discounts, other podcasts from the Wild Initiative family, and more.